Hope lies in beauty. Beauty is in what is made in Italy, and often what is made in Italy abroad is art. This is Biz Story, focus on Made in Italy. Welcome, we are in the third season. Let's welcome back our friend Domenico Sepe after the success of the episode in the first season. Domenico, it was an episode that got hundreds of thousands of views, interactions, and shares, and yet we were talking about art. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Being here to talk about and discuss art always excites me because it means leaving a message. And what we did in the previous episode was something extraordinary precisely because we told it together in a simple, essential, direct way without too much overthinking, without too much philosophy, but we said important things. Well,
even while preparing it in the sense that we just went with the flow as you do in a podcast.
Absolutely, yes. A podcast is a conversation between friends, but as you mentioned, it brings so much beauty, and from that beauty comes the story of art.
Domenica, we'll get to the topic of beauty, because among the artists we've met, you are the one who truly represents commitment, also from the perspective of sensitivity and spirituality. The world, as we said in the introduction, is on fire. It's a completely gray world, and so we talk about hope in beauty. But let me start with a premise with you regarding the world of art. In those places, so the Persian Gulf, the Middle East, before 2026, art was booming. I mean, the Guggenheim was about to open, the Louvre Abu Dhabi was about to open. There were a series of exhibitions that are now on hold. No one talks about it because obviously art is rarely discussed. We prefer to talk about other things, unfortunately, about the high cost of energy. But art too is experiencing this completely bleak moment. I don't want to talk to you about war, of course, but you are a very sensitive artist. The first question I want to ask you is, how does an artist experience these times? As a sensitive artist, moreover, one who is also very attuned to spirituality like you and like the works you create, how are you experiencing this moment? And then in some way, in your world, how are you experiencing the difficulties in the Middle East, or more generally, the challenges facing the market and art itself, since there is less and less money? What is your perspective on the moment we're going through from the point of view of the artist Domenico Sepe?
Well, yes, the artist experiences these situations by reacting to them. We have seen emblematic examples in the history of art, precisely through this strong inspiration that is, however, tied to tragedy. The tragedy of war is a profound drama for an artist. The artist is used to showing and creating beauty, but war touches on dynamics and chords that practically force you to react. The reaction is precisely one of denunciation. That is, what does the artist do? The markets, as rightly mentioned, the art market comes to a halt. Some museums are suspended in this oblivion, in these, in my opinion, delusions of war. And we must do what we have always done, denounce through art. In my deep reaction to this theme, I started more than 5 months ago, in fact, precisely in 2025, beginning from a central message, which is that of Pope Leo, peace. Peace. And how did I want to tell the story of peace? Through something extremely dramatic. The loss of a child by a parent.
Yeah.
In this case, I chose a mother.
We'll get to that.
Of course, who loses a child? No, just to say that was my reaction to this theme.
By the way, let me say, you mentioned Pope Leo. When we met during the first season, you were finishing a work that was dedicated to Pope Francis, which hadn't been fully revealed yet because you still had to unveil it.
We were waiting.
And as a matter of fact, it was a work that you personally presented to Pope Leo XIV at the Vatican. And it was a major news story that appeared in every single major newspaper and on all the television channels across the world. Before even talking about the meeting with Pope Leo XIV, that statue, your work of Pope Francis, has a very important symbolism. Earlier we talked about sensitivity, about spirituality, and there is the cross. The work was presented, and I would like you to tell us how you came to create that piece, and maybe also share Pope Leo XIV's reactions.
Thank you for this question because it allows me to share a glimpse into my journey. Actually, I would say a very important part of my life, because that work of Pope Francis was born out of a personal need to tell a story, the story of migrants, of these people who are searching for hope, who are looking for people who will welcome them, who are seeking a country that perhaps does not have the hardships that unfortunately exist in their own countries. A topic that was almost fading away. Unfortunately, with the death of Pope Francis, I chose not to celebrate the figure just as a figure that
You'd already met.
I had met in 2015. And so I had this deep connection. I had met him precisely during a dialogue in a private audience where, among other things, I had presented a very important work, which is St. George, a large equestrian piece exhibited in the Vatican, a beautiful moment. And so, in relation to this memory, I wanted to tell the story of Pope Francis, but through what? Through what he has done, that is, by putting migrants at the center. And so I chose to go to Calabria, to Steccato di Cutro.
Let us all take a moment to remember that Cutro is the exact place where that tragic boat sank. And it is where those heartbreaking images of the small children who drowned on the beach truly moved the hearts of the entire world.
Absolutely, and I said to myself, I have to go to that place, I have to go there and look for something. And there I discovered that the wreck still existed, some fragments of this wreck that unfortunately tell the story of this tragedy. In Don Pasquale, I found hospitality, and so this wreck was made available to me. I took some fragments from it and created the pastoral staff for Pope Francis, a pastoral staff that is a true relic.
Which is the cross that the statue of Pope Francis holds in its hand.
In the statue, exactly. And then I thought, this is certainly a work I didn't create to sell it,
To
put it in some gallery, but I thought it should tell the world about this tragedy, continue to tell this tragedy as Pope Francis did. And I found a welcome from an incredible figure, Pope Leo XIV, who accepted this tribute of mine, not just to Pope Francis, but above all to this theme. Where did he welcome me? On the Parvis of St. Peter's.
beautiful.
He presents
All the hard work and dedication put into this. Then shortly after, we finally see them appearing on the show. I can certainly imagine the deep emotion you must feel, but I really have to stop and ask you a question about it. We're filming at a time when Pope Leo XIV is, I won't say every day, but almost under attack from the American administration, right?
you.
But you met the Pope, and you met him at the moment when he welcomed the attack that had been made against the pontificate that preceded him. Your sensitivity as an artist towards the man and then towards the Holy Father.
Look, I'll tell you a very special anecdote. When he approached the work towards us, he bent down and turned to my son, Michel.
Right, because you were with,
I was with my family, my children were there, my wife was there, and he showed extraordinary humanity because my wife was there waiting. She was a bit nervous, you know. And he said, but isn't she going to take a photo? So
he
was truly welcoming. He was like a father. That's how I called Pope Francis.
good.
Exactly, but he was like a father, a person who approached in such a polite, so humane way. And then he really appreciated the work I did, even the one I made for him. I created this lion at the feet of St. Peter as a symbol, as a tribute to the scene. That
Sculpture that we see in the
photos. And this meeting definitely left a deep, important mark on me, which brought me back to that theme, the theme of peace. It brought me back to that message. Pope Francis said, pray for me for the burden that he carried. Leone, on the other hand, left this message, peace. And at that moment, I decided to start this work, which later, and let me be reminded of a Pacis, tells exactly this story.
In fact, this brings us quite naturally to the next important question that I would like to pose, if I may be so bold as to say so. You recently made major international headlines for your decision to dedicate your latest work to the grieving mother of Domenico. He was the young, innocent little boy who was tragically caught up in those complex and devastating judicial errors that occurred during his critical transplant operation at the Monaldi Hospital, a case that has deeply touched the hearts of many people across the country and sparked a wide conversation about medical responsibility and justice. You are an artist who lives deeply from a place of sensitivity and spirituality, precisely in relation to what surrounds us. The work did not start with, but you decided to dedicate it to Domenico's mother. Why?
Because that work represents the greatest pain. That work represents, it's true that there is a dead child, a child who loses their life, but the child there loses their life, and so unfortunately the body no longer feels anything. But the body that feels, that perceives the pain, the weight, the drama, is that of the mother. By then, everyone was talking only about that topic, that is, about this mother who had lost.
The newspapers and TV by then.
It was something incredible. Very simply, a journalist from Il Mattino calls me and says, Domenico, we appreciated the work, but that's a piece you made because of what's happening. I said, no, this is a work that tells of the pain a mother feels when she loses a child. And so I really feel like dedicating it to Patrizia, Mrs. Patrizia, who unfortunately is experiencing this tragedy right now. It's a pietà, a contemporary pietà, a pietà that speaks to our times, that tells of that pain, but it's the same pain that, for example, we find in mothers who lose their children in places of war, who have no power at all, who can't do anything to protect the lives of their own children.
Mothers,
As parents, as fathers too, of course, in a general sense. And so this work leaves me, so starting from Pope Leo's message of peace, I said, but to ask for peace, what is behind peace? Why do we ask for peace? Why does the world ask for peace? Why does the world say no to war? For what reason? Because there is a tragedy there. Those who have not experienced this tragedy, unfortunately, can never truly understand what lies behind it.
perhaps the artist is, may I say, it's the metaphor for how we are able in a tangible way to show how much we suffer or how much our sensitivity is affected. Or at least maybe you have the opportunity through a work of art to make
People truly feel and see the pain you experience over something that then grips everyone. You said it perfectly. We have the duty to connect certain themes through the language that is art. It is a universal language. Art is a language that does not need translation. Looking at that explicit image of a mother holding her dead child in her arms is a message that reaches the entire world. It doesn't need translation, I repeat myself. And so the artist has the duty to highlight and to become a communicative instrument for humanity. This is the true function of the artist, not that of selling. You know, we talked about this topic in the previous podcast, but the artist has this task, an important task. In fact, right, Luca defines the artist as a deputy of the divine, but not because the artist is a deity, rather because the artist performs an act of creation. But who is that creation for? For us, for ourselves, for those who then benefit from that work. But speaking specifically about the artwork we see here and that you are creating, how did this piece come about? So right now we're watching you, we're observing your process. How does this manual work come to life? Did it start from a sketch? Well, I initially made some sketches, but we're talking about sketches I did back in 2020. I had this need to create a pietà. But I had never found the right moment, and the right moment means telling something that permeates your everyday life. For an artist, the relationship they have with people, with international issues and so on, is fundamental. And I had made some sketches of a pietà, Christ in the arms of Neto and the Virgin, which represents the theme of the monograph. So I made 2 or 3 sketches that referred back to that, but I felt that it wasn't really expressing the need I had at that moment, which was to tell something dramatic. Granted, the pietà is already dramatic in itself, but it needed to be told in a contemporary way. And so that's when I started thinking about what happens in conflict zones, Ukraine and Gaza, to name 2 well-known examples, but we know very well that unfortunately conflicts are constant in Africa and other parts of the world as well. So instead I chose the child because in this world perhaps is the least protected person. Child labor exploitation. Wars affect children. They are the ones who suffer. It's not right for a child to lose a craft, to lose the ability to grow. And so I chose the child as the theme. And then the mother. The mother, not because she's more important than the father, but because she reminds us of the idea of the mother who loses Christ, who loses her son. The mother who is at the center of society, the woman who is at the center of society as a mother. And so I wanted this to be at the center. So at a certain point after the meeting with Pope Leo, the theme of peace told us, I have to tell it now in this way so contemporary, and that brings us back to the tragedies of the present moment. And that's how the work was born. The work was then dedicated to Mrs. Palisi, as we have recounted. Yes, it is something that is evolving, that is the iconographic choice. So the veil over the face, the position of the child came about as I worked on it. All the choices I made, for example, stylistic ones, the position of the hands, the arms, the cloth, the drapery, all came about in the process. So it's a work that I created almost without a sketch, without a very precise idea. But the idea was ultimately to convey the drama, to put everything at the center, to focus everything toward the center. One of your most celebrated and famous works is the Risen Christ, also known as the Revealed Christ. And there too we can see that the delicate veil has a truly fundamental symbolic aspect. We already had the opportunity to talk about this piece extensively back in the first season of our program. This recurring motif of the veil reappears frequently throughout your various works. For instance, we recently saw it beautifully executed in the sculpture of the Siren Parthenope. The veil carries a series of symbols like the veiled Isis itself. Again, we are talking about ancient Egypt and the veiled Christ, from which you then draw inspiration for the risen Christ. From the perspective of the artist Domenico Sepe, what is the symbolism of the veil, considering you often use it in your works? Yes, by now my works will always have a veiled part, and the veil tells two important things. First of all, the strongest meaning is that the veil symbolizes the victory of life over death. A life not as we usually understand it, not just material life, but an eternal life, the one that exists in the soul, in memory, in the heart, right? So the veil mainly symbolizes this. And then it elevates what you create. The veil elevates the beauty of a body. We imagine it on a female body, as I did, for example, with the mermaid Parthenope, where in addition to a truly fantastic body, and by the way, I love to mention Ivana San Marco, my official model, she lent herself to portraying this contemporary body because it had to be a contemporary mermaid. We artists have to tell the story of our own time, and so the veil symbolizes this as well. The veil is central to my work for these reasons: the sublimation of beauty and life triumphing over death. Now I bring out the best in you. Yes, go ahead. And the best of you comes out when we talk about art and the marketability of art. Earlier you said something that we noted down, but I know your thoughts on this matter. When you mentioned the statue of Pope Francis, you said it wasn't a work created to be sold. Of course. Let me start from the beginning.
Many workshops, many artists even today produce works and then sign them, but in reality, it's a work from the artist's workshop. This concept of the artist's workshop dates back to the Renaissance. A work is a true work of art when it is created to be commercialized in the heart and mind of an artist. That is a true work of art.
It's not a work of art, as we well know, because a work must be born from a need. Let me give a telling example. When Van Gogh paints his works, he is not aware of what he is painting, in the sense that he is aware of expressing his own vision of the world, so he knows his own means. He paints something that you see through his eyes. Van Gogh, during his lifetime, does not sell a single work because none of his works are created to be sold. He doesn't paint them because he needs to sell them. Van Gogh paints because he feels a physical inner need to express through his colors and his light what he saw.
And
Van Gogh's works were his true vision. That is, he wasn't interpreting reality, it was what his eyes actually saw. When he looked up at the sky and saw the starry night, that's truly how he saw it. In motion, because it was also the result of his psychophysical condition.
Van Gogh sold no paintings in his life.
Absolutely, he didn't sell it even later, when he was understood through the letters he wrote to his brother, where you can grasp his motivation, and so the work, in fact, the painting becomes a true work of art. It acquires
the value.
It also acquires an economic value. Clearly, Van Gogh's first works were sold at already high prices at the beginning of his career, but this system, this method of selling, is correct because it allows us to discover the beauty behind a work of art, and then it is sold to a museum and thus made available to the community or to a private collector. It is well known that great patrons buy art, and that's how it should be. The problem arises when you create a work just to sell it.
It
doesn't make sense. I'm not creating, I'm producing an object that becomes just a piece of decor, as we've said, right? I mean, if I go somewhere and see that there's white and blue, and then I make a white and blue piece, it's no longer a work of art. It's just an object that completes the decor. That's not a work of art, because it doesn't come from an inner need, it doesn't come from a conflict, it doesn't arise to tell a story of drama. You can even sell that piece, you can even sell it through the gallery system, for goodness sake. But it's the gallerist who discovers the beauty behind that work. It's the gallerist who has the intuition to understand, yes, here the artist has addressed an important theme that I want to make available to the community or that I want to sell.
So in this case, Domenico, forgive me, I'm playing both the lawyer and the gallerist.
And then after that, the
professional gallerist would then require and expect the artist to provide their artwork with a detailed narrative and compelling storytelling, because there are certain complex works that perhaps might not be immediately accessible or even fully understandable to the gallerists themselves. Of course, there are those who are enlightened, those with a strong sensitivity, but today, in the world of social media and images, which we've talked about before, for a work to be better understood, does it need the artist to provide some storytelling so it can be more easily grasped?
Well, this is where a new figure comes in, right? Which is that of the art critic. Often we artists say maybe the critic isn't necessary, meaning that they write things based on their own intuition, and that's perfectly fine.
Sometimes they write for the money.
Yes, well, that's another matter. Here we're getting into a different discussion, but the figure of the art critic emerges because they study the artist, engage in dialogue with the artist, try to understand their motivations, and then investigate the artwork, find the correlations, write a text, and that text is then shared by the artist because within that text lies the motivation, all the research the critic has done on the artist. It's a truly scientific study, and that's where that text, which tells the story of the artist, aligns with the gallerist.
This
is the reality, the truth. It's not that the artist makes a brushstroke on a canvas and says that brushstroke is the drama of the world. The critic gets paid and writes for you that the brushstroke is the drama of the world, and the gallerist takes the work and
tells its story.
Let me give an example. I want to do that.
I
talked about a brushstroke, but we could talk about cuts. Fontana was an artist. He was a Baroque sculptor who told stories through ceramics, who conveyed polychromy, who expressed something extraordinary.
He started out as a ceramicist. We did an episode with Riccardo Guarneri, who is now the leading figure of analytical painting in Italy last season. And he told us, speaking about Fontana, that Fontana began as a ceramicist. In fact, when talking with his greatest contemporaries, he would say, I started as a ceramicist. Then came the cut, which is the vision beyond the canvas.
At a certain point, yes, I was describing it as an artist might, as opposed to a historian or a critic. He cuts the canvas to say, let's go beyond the surface. That is, enter this groove I am creating in the canvas to understand what lies behind the artist. And here, the critic must have the ability to narrate this and thus historicizes the artist.
On the other hand,
if there is no ceramist, no Baroque sculptor, if there is no lived, real, documented history of the artist, we can do whatever we want, but it is not art.
You answered me precisely. Domenico, we know you, and I'll leave the last question to a new development that concerns you. We all certainly know you as a truly brilliant and nationally famous writer. Well, it is true that you haven't really settled down here in Vatican City yet, but we sincerely wish there were many more talented artists exactly like you in this world. And so we know you mainly as a sculptor, but you are also a painter. There is a very recent work of yours that has made headlines in the news and newspapers these days. The Dawn of Diego, if I'm not mistaken. You are famous for the statue of Maradona, but this is an important painting, and it's a new Domenico, a Domenico that deals with his story in a different style.
No, it's a Domenico who has this open window onto the city of Naples, a city that today is divided between classical beauty but also folklore, the contemporary, and let's say the popular. Today, Naples is a city that I would say is characterized only by murals, and so I chose not to make another sculpture, but to tell its story the way all contemporary artists do. It seems like today only murals are being made, and I said, okay, I'll do it too. I wanted to portray a triumphant Diego on a canvas treated as if it were a wall. So in telling the story of a contemporary Naples, excuse me for using this term, almost completely covered in graffiti, I superimposed this figure of Diego on a defaced wall, but also to convey the beauty of this aspect. That is, folklore is not something negative. It's a characteristic, but it's one of the many shades of Naples. It's not just folklore.
And
so here I created this new project, this work dedicated to the Dawn of Diego.
Now we'll have to do another episode talking about the Dawn of Diego.
We have
another season still to produce. You know,
that I like to talk, I like to tell stories, and I also like to open debates. About Naples, we could start a very long debate. It's a fantastic city. It's about to welcome the Pope soon. It's getting ready for the America's Cup. It's facing many important issues, and I think we artists could do something more. I hope that we'll be given the opportunity to express ourselves even more than we already do. Let's not tell the story of Naples only through graffiti and murals. Let's tell the story of Naples with all its potential. This is the message I would like to leave.
Even before that, the very powerful message, I want to return in closing to the claim of the third season. Hope lies in beauty, and beauty is in what is made in Italy. Hope for Domenico Sepe and beauty for Domenico Sepe. Just 2 words.
Hope is central to my journey because hope is that energy that allows you to go beyond human limits. Hope means to hope, to have trust, to believe in the future. and above all, to look toward what is new. The other element is
beauty. You've mentioned it several times, even unintentionally, that
pervades us. The artist must embody beauty, even in a work that does not depict beauty. When we talk about beauty, we're not talking about aesthetics. Beauty means the message that the work leaves you with. When you encounter a sculpture, a painting, a work of art, beauty is the feeling it conveys to you, regardless of what it represents. That is beauty, that spark that lives inside you and ignites a feeling. That is beauty.
and this is art. Thanks to Domenico Sepe. We'll see you soon with the next episode of A Biz Story focus on Made in Italy. We talked about art, we talked about hope, about the beauty of Made in Italy understood as art. We will meet Domenico again, maybe next season, to talk about other things, hoping that the world will be less gray than the one we are living in these days. See you soon with another episode of Biz Story focus on Made in Italy. Hope lies in beauty, and beauty is in Made in Italy.